Good afternoon to you and welcome to NTV Dr. Deep Talk Show. My name is Priscilla Regina Ndaloga, your host this afternoon. Now, the Dr. Deep is the development response to Displacement Impacts Project, and that is Dr. Deep. It is a regional multi-sectional project focusing on the impacts of the practitioner presence of refugees on the hosting countries. In the 4 countries that we're talking about this evening, we do have Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Uganda. Just in Uganda alone, Dr. Deep is a flagship government project funded by a $50 million loan and a $150 million grant from the World Bank, and it is implemented under the Office of the Prime Minister. Now, here to have this conversation with me, I do have guests in studio, but Dr. Deep does address the unmet social, economical, and environmental needs in the local refugee hosting communities in the 15 districts of Adjumani, Lamo, Koboko, Moyo, Obongi, and you do have Yumbe, Madiokolo, and Terengo, and that's only in the West Nile sub-region. We do have Lamuo in the Acholi region, Hoima, Chikube, and Chiliandongo in the Bunyoro sub-region, and also Isinjiro and Kamwenge, as well as Chegegwa in the Southwest sub-region. Now, the Dr. Deep project is the subject of today's talk show. In studio with me to talk about Dr. Deep, we do have Honorable Hilary Onek, who's the Minister for Relief, Disaster Preparedness, and also Refugees. And also joining him is Simon Chisaka, who's the Communication Specialist, Dr. Deep. Good afternoon to you, gentlemen. I'll start with you, Simon. Good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon to you, Priscilla.
Welcome to Dr. Deep Talk Show.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Honorable Hilary, it's a pleasure to have you.
Yes, Priscilla, it's a pleasure coming to your studio, and thank you for hosting us.
Okay. All right, I'll start with the Minister. We know that IGAD had a sitting conference back in 2016, from which we then had the generation idea of a 5-year program that is now named Dr. Deep. Please tell us about the inception of this program.
Yeah, thank you, Priscilla. Towards the end of 2016, we had a conference in Nairobi to look at the resettlement of Somalians, refugees who desire to go back after the successful operations there, which flushes out the Al-Shabaab and from Mogadishu, and eventually, relieving or setting free areas where government operates in Somalia. The conference where the World Bank, the United Nations, and many other international agencies were in Nairobi, worked out and agreed to finance the return of the Somalians who wish to go back. But then the issue arose. I remember I raised it in the conference when my turn came to speak. And I said, well, what about us who are hosting large numbers of refugees? At the moment, we don't have resources to keep them. They are partaking on our own services to our people. For example, we send medicines for 3 months to the sub-counties, our sub-counties, but those medicines don't last even 1 month because the refugees are all getting the same treatment. In our classrooms, where we used to have about 40 to 50 children, we now have over 250 to 260 children in one classroom. And in my speech, I made it clear that if nothing is done to help the host communities who are hosting these refugees, and yet really sacrificing the infrastructure which is now being depleted, we may reconsider our policy on hosting refugees. I made a very strong point there. And then I think the partners in the discussion, they realized that they need to help the host communities as well, where the refugees are settled. And that's when the World Bank came up with an offer of $50 million as a soft-term loan to assist governments to develop infrastructure in the districts where the refugees are settled. Now, I came back from that conference, then the other countries were also offered different amount depending on the size of refugees. I brought that back to government, and we took it to Parliament, and we had a lot of resistance that government could not borrow just because refugees. But we labored to explain to Parliament that this money is not for refugees, it's for our hosts, to relieve them of the pressure they're getting as a result of hosting large number of refugees. And eventually it was approved by 2017, and that's when the project implementation team was formed. And to date, they've been moving along that program of strengthening or enlarging the service levels for host communities where refugees are being hosted. Classrooms, schools are being built, the health centers are being enlarged and built, and some limited infrastructure like roads, some limited roads and bridges are also being considered. And they've moved further now to livelihood as well, to support the host communities to generate more from their fields, from their garden or whatever business trade that they do, to generate more money and more resources, more business to enrich the hosts who are hosting the refugees. That's briefly what I can state. Thank you.
All right. From your ministerial position, that's definitely a good background of how Dr. DIP comes into existence. And when it was put into inception, then we do have the communication specialist, Simon Chisaka. Now to let us know, we've had the acronym Dr. DIP, but explain to our viewers in summary, what is Dr. DIP, what does it mean, and the quick summary of the project altogether.
Thank you, Priscilla. I first of all want to say I'm very honored to be here with my minister, my senior and distinguished minister, under whom I operate, and I represent my boss, my director, Dr. Robert Lim Lim, who was not able to make it today, but I pray I'll be able to fill his very big shoes. So I'll continue. Dr. DIP stands for the Development Response to Displacement Impacts Project. It is a multi-regional, multi-sectoral project, like you said in your introduction, and it covers it covers the countries of Djibouti, Kenya, Uganda, and Ethiopia. So it covers all those countries, and Uganda is one of them. Dr. DIP was initiated, as the minister said, during that conference. It was initiated as a paradigm shift away from a humanitarian response, emergency response, to a response, a comprehensive response that addresses the social, economic, and environmental impacts of refugees in the refugee hosting districts. And so and it was really focused on the long-term impact, because refugees now don't just stay for a short time, they stay for a long time. So it focused on that protracted stay of the refugees. And so the way they implemented it is through Dr. DIP, like the minister said. So Dr. DIP is formed to do that. I want to point out to you the project development objective of Dr. DIP. In this first project, its first objective is to improve social and economic access, access to basic social economic services and infrastructure. So that's the first component of Dr. DIP. And then it enhances a livelihood it enhances incomes in the area of livelihoods. So it provides opportunities, enhances or provides opportunities, and then it also enhances environmental management in its third component. But the big components are environmental management and then livelihood support programs. So it addresses all those areas. Okay. Under infrastructure, there's a lot that's being done, like the minister said. And then under environmental management, there are a lot of projects that we're going to talk about. And then under livelihoods, there are also projects there that the project addresses. Okay. So that's it.
All right. Minister Nek, we wanted to find out, why does Uganda have to take on the responsibility of caring for 1.6 million refugees, and yet you are talking about the environmental pressure that is costing, especially in host communities in different regions? You're talking about the livelihood cost of hosting refugees.
Well, Dr. DIP project has been gradually evolving to cover the necessary areas that the displacements, or rather the influx of refugees, have occasioned on those particular districts and the environment around it. One of them is that the refugees are using wood fuel for cooking, for heat. And the wood fuel is derived from our bushes, forests, and so on. So they get degraded, and we noticed that. We realized that sometime back, about 2 years back, or two or 3 years back, and we have integrated the component of environment in it, in the DRDIP, to make sure we cause replanting back of the lost vegetations, the trees and so on. We as part of the program. And there are also, that's why we brought in also on top of that, we brought in, besides reforestation and so on, we brought in a component to strengthen the host community to be more productive and be able to generate more income and also services to the refugees themselves, because they buy from our markets, they come and go to the shops. So these people need livelihood support to strengthen their businesses in the districts where Dr. DRDIP, the 15 districts which are mentioned here. So the project is evolving actually, to tackle the needs.
Okay, all right. And with the recent numbers of refugees that we're seeing coming into Uganda, we're experiencing refugee influx, and yet we see the project started focusing with 11 districts, but then it has moved on to include 4 other districts. Now we're at 15 districts. Now, what does that mean in the face of the increased numbers, especially with what's happening with our neighbors in Congo?
Well, Uganda, first of all, has been hosting refugees since 1942. When the under British colony, they brought Polish refugees, which were settled here in Mukono, and some were settled in Nyabweya in Masindi. So we have had long history of hosting refugees from that time. And this continued from in the 50s, South Sudan and Congo in the 60s, Rwanda, and so forth. More have been coming. And definitely, currently, as we see, the influx of refugees has increased, and now we have over 1.6 million. And this, of course, poses more challenges on what Dr. DRDIP project is trying to resolve. Because we are trying to make sure that we battle whatever the consequences of this big population amongst us. And so generally that's what it means.
What was, when we were having its inception in 2017, what was the targeted or expected population of refugees that we were dealing with?
At the time, we had about 1.2 million refugees in Uganda, and it was increasing, but slowly. But today, we are 1.6, and the influx is continuing. Recently, during the last 2 months, we received close to 50,000, mostly from Congo side. So it calls for, this Dr. DRDIP project is kind of needs project. It is hinged on our needs. And we shall, if we, for example, we have finished, during the first phase, we finished the $50 million in the projects in all these districts. Now we are on the second phase, of using the $150 million grant. And we shall, as the project ends next year, around June, July, we shall, before that time, definitely we shall have developed more projects and submit. We shall probably get more support from the World Bank as the needs keep increasing. So, but our main challenge now is that the areas where we settle the refugees becoming smaller and smaller. Population is increasing. And in the northern part of the country, most of the refugees are hosted in land provided by the community. The community has been giving land, offering land for certain refugees. But those also are soon getting limited because our population is also growing. In the west and southwest, these are government lands, and those are also getting full. So we are still trying to debate to see what options are we going to have to take into consideration if the number goes beyond 2 million. That one will come when we discuss as government to look at the various aspects and see which route to follow as government. The Department of Refugees is a very, is heavily supported by the UNHCR because most of the operational staff are contract staff which are paid for by the UNHCR, and but we have few public servants in it, but we mainly work together with the security agencies who help us because these refugees come with different behavior, characters, and sometimes what to us we consider as crime in their country is not a crime. For example, rape. For us, we are very serious, put in prison. For them, rape is normal way of getting a wife in some of their cultures. So we have different behaviors coming in. So those are what we are battling with because we try to also, as the number increases, the demand is more on us to try to tame them, to follow our rules, our norms of survival, living here, other than their ways, and so on. So there's a lot we can say about them, but thank you, Priscilla. We can wait for more.
All right, thank
questions.
you so much, Honorable Onek. Now, turning to you, Simon.
Yes.
He has given us the abstract of it. He has talked about phase one. How, on ground, what has been the implementation exercise of putting phase one out, of course, amidst the challenges that he has spoken about, and what have been the results of that?
Okay. Yes, it's a 5-year program that started in 2017. It ends in 2023 June, slightly over 5 years, because there was a delay caused by COVID-19 in the 2020-21 period. So we hope to get another phase, but you can call it phase one, which is okay. Yeah, Dr. DIP has had a tremendous economic impact on the districts, in the 15 districts where it is implemented. It supports the NDP 3, the National Development Plan 2 and 3, by providing, establishing social economic infrastructure all over those districts. It helps the districts with their plans, development plans. It boosts the economies of those districts, and it has helped with the cohesion between the refugees and the host communities, just because the refugees are the ones who are bringing in all this this investment in the districts. But I want to go into specifics. We've done a lot since 2017, and I want to address some of the specifics of what Dr. DIP has done, which is quite tremendous indeed. I'll give it in the form of numbers. I hope numbers will paint a picture for the audience and the viewers out there. For example, just under the first component of social economic services and infrastructure, Dr. DIP has constructed 988 classrooms so far, 16, and those classrooms have been provided with 16,400 desks, 510 water tanks, 148 offices, 2,095 stands latrines, 55 staff houses. Each house houses 2 teachers, two units and one, and more. And so this has greatly improved enrollment and the learning environment in the refugee hosting districts. The enrollment has gone up by 28% in the schools that are supported by Dr. DIP. The pupil to classroom ratio has fallen from a high of 114 pupils to a class to 71 pupils per class in the refugee hosting districts, compared to the national standard of 53 to pupils in a class. But it's coming down, getting close to that 53 standard. In health, we have done 30 general wards, 36 OPD units, 17 maternity wards, 51 staff houses, 12 doctors' houses, 3 operating theaters, 967 fencing projects, 200 and something latrines, 119 rainwater tanks, and more, which has of course increased access to health services and reduced the pressure on the health services in refugee hosting districts. We have supported as a project the construction and rehabilitation of 279 kilometers worth of road. As the Minister pointed out, we've constructed 10 small bridges and 29 roads which connect the various communities. We supported many piped water supply systems. In this component, just that one component, we have reached over 2 million beneficiaries, 2.8 million beneficiaries from both refugee and host communities, and of whom 54% are women. So there's a very good gender balancing in the project. And under environment, I want to point out, if I could, that we've also had a lot of impact there. We have reached a total of 141,000 beneficiaries. We have thousands of forestry sub-projects. We have planted 1.3 million trees planted under DRDIP with a survival rate of 20%. We have restored bare hills, 264 hectares of bare hills, 243 hectares of wetlands, 154 hectares of riverbanks, 2,321 hectares of woodlots planted. That's tremendous. And we also, we have a component under this environment called labor-intensive public works, where we pay people, we pay refugees, we pay people in the host communities to do work so they can get income, but at the same time create assets like roads, like tree lots, like valley tanks and dams. So we pay them to do work, and we've created 4.7 million days of work. 4.7 million, they call it person days of work.
And this is within the 5 years?
Within, yes, just already done. Whereby the beneficiaries have received 18.3 billion shillings in earnings, 18.3 billion, and they have saved 6 billion of those earnings, of those shillings. So under livelihoods, we support enterprises. We say, okay, you form a group and choose a business, we guide them on what works in their area, and they choose a business and implement their businesses. And so this has supported 68,550 beneficiaries in this area of livelihoods. So we have 1,984 agricultural projects and 15 in aquaculture. But let me just tell you this before I end this section. It's because of this, the beneficiaries who are involved in livelihoods have earned 2.2 billion. So you can imagine all that income coming in, and by the beneficiaries for both host and refugees, and 76.2 million in profits from those businesses, so they're profitable, they're earning profits, and then 8.2 billion in group savings, and 8.1 billion in loans given out, and 3.4 billion in loans paid back. So that's just the big picture.
All right, thank you so much, Simon. That definitely paints us a good picture. The components that are under the project, of course, social and economic services and infrastructures that you have highlighted, and also the livelihoods program, but also sustainable environment management, which is very key, especially on the side of the hosting communities. However, this still does not answer the challenge that is present right now. For example, we do seem to have more refugees in host communities than those of the host communities, meaning that you're getting an override in terms of resources, natural resources, social resources, among others. For example, in Moyo, you do have 54% of refugees, whereas when it comes to host communities, it's 46%. Adjumani is also the same. It has more refugees than host communities. So in the presence of these components, how are you dealing with this particular challenge, Minister Onek?
It's a big challenge, But we are counting because most of the refugees would be happy to go back if there was opportunity to go back to their country. But because they still have that insecurity, they still remain here. The major challenge now we have is the services to those refugees, as their number is increasing, and the UN systems are not getting enough resources like they used to. And we have to kind of, to keep them alive, we have to invent a way to go about it. Last year, for example, in Germany, our department they opened up a huge, not very big, but maybe 100 or so acres, no, 500 acres of for communal farming among the refugees, so that they would bridge the gap of the deficit that they get from UNHCR. Whatever they harvest, they generate money and food from it, and so on. But I don't see, that is one of the good innovations, but the real solution would be, to me, is to have peace in the sub-region, so that the refugees are able to go back home and live peacefully. And in that, our relationship with those countries should be trade, so that they go back and we trade. Because we have already cultivated good relations with most of them who have come to our country. They've gone to our schools, they've what, everything. They would wish still to have that attachment. That may be a way to go. But of course, that is really, we are discussing that, but our President, His Excellency General Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, has been a leading peacemaker in this sub-region. He's been trying to talk to all these countries, cooperate with them in restoring peace in their countries. For example, right now, we are trying to help Congo, Eastern Congo, to open up roads so that there is ease in communication, and eventually transform the area to be more of a trading area than a war zone. And also discussing with their governments and advising on how to go about those problems which are in Congo, which I believe maybe over time things can be harmonized if the external forces which are fueling the internal conflicts in Congo are contained. That is a major problem. In South Sudan, they have got their own internal fights, which doesn't seem to see the light. And I think the major challenge there is really lack of consciousness of their being there. Because, and then poverty. So when, for example, they now don't value their country as a state, as where they belong, and people now, to acquire something, the use of the gun is applied. The gun now become a means of acquiring whatever you want to eat, or it's a problem. The society gets into problem then, plus their own internal ethnic quarrels and so on. Our president is also trying his best to try to harmonize the leadership there, to come together and see how best to think about their country and restore peace. By and large, some limited peace is there, and because some are going back, a few are going back. And we are hoping that there will be peace, long-lasting peace, so that most of them go back to develop their country, and then we establish our relationship in form of trade, linkage, so that Africa can be transformed, can grow, other than constant conflict, destruction, etc., which is ongoing. So I hope I've answered your
Well, you have raised more questions.
I've raised more questions.
One of the questions that you have raised, and of course we know that the president is doing his due diligence to
He's
ensure
really
that
trying his best.
Regional harmony and peace, especially on the leadership level. However, we are looking at a picture whereby you have talked about replacement of these refugees back to their home countries, and much as that is in words, how practical is it in terms of Dr. DIP? Is that the end goal of Dr. DIP after the project is evaluated and assessed? And then you've also talked about some of those refugees that are returning back to their countries, their original countries. However, from your submission, it is a return on free will. However, we are expectant that there should be a governmental return policy in regards to, you know, handling refugee influx in Uganda.
Oh, you see, we are following the international laws and the UN Convention and African Union Convention as well, which states clearly that we don't force back those asylum seekers because they may still be having danger where they come from. We have also done other programs like which would make them, encourage them to go back. For example, some of our education center where refugees are being trained from primary, secondary school, and so on before they go higher. Along particularly secondary education, we have integrated both technical and academic together, so that those who are doing senior 1, senior 2, 3, 4, they also do alongside. In the morning they do the academic up to 2 o'clock, then they go and do skills development. They train as technicians or in both agriculture, in construction, in mechanical things. So we have trained a number of refugees now. If you go to places like Boyale, where there are settled, there's a refugee settlement there. In the township there, most of the technicians, the builders, the motor vehicle mechanics, there are these refugees who are trained from those schools. They come and they are now self-sustaining. And I have also evidence that some of those trained have decided to go back home because now they have tool of production. They are trained, like in one technical school in Parabec, that is in Lamour. Over 800 of those who went through the technical institute, which is run by the Catholic Church there, Don Bosco or the Catholic Church, over 800 went back to their country. And because they got acquired skills ranging from tailoring, construction, masonry, carpentry, electrical, electrical engineering, and some mechanical engineering and so forth, where they go as mechanics, and over 800 went back. And we are encouraged to, when I saw that result, then our policy is right. The policy we made here is let us give them skills and also academic, so that eventually they would wish to go and exercise those skills in their countries. Because here in our country, we have abandoned skills, and they hardly find labor here. So they would rather go where their expertise is required, and so forth. Alongside also with those other social, psychosocial programs, and then trying to also encourage them that their country is great, let them go back. We try our best to model them, even if the going back is voluntary. Many of them are getting desire to go back, and that will be helpful. Of course, Dr. DIP now, when you put together with Dr. DIP primarily is for host community. Although we get the refugees also somehow in, because if we encourage Dr. DIP to be there specifically for refugees alone, and they see that will become creating permanency, and they may not wish now, they may not have time to go back to their country, and so on. And yet, our population is also growing here, and if the refugees are encouraged to be here permanent, that will generate another conflict in future. So Dr. DIP primarily is for host community, but they can also serve the refugees. They share the services refugees can go to the school, to the health center where we have developed, and move on those, and then in the infrastructure they benefit from those to ease the life of our people. At the same time, refugees are beneficiary, but not to encourage a permanency, because that would create another dimension of conflict with the host communities.
All right, thank you so much, Minister Odek. Now, turning to you, Simon.
Yes.
Of course, from the Minister's submission, you get to also sense that there's challenges towards Dr. DIP. One of the challenges you would be looking at currently is that the more refugees come into a community, the more the indigenous people push away from those communities and are displaced in one way or another. And then you also look at a challenge of behavior differences that he talked about. They're coming from different countries, they behave differently, and that is going to cause some sort of conflict or friction within the hosting communities. There's also the issue of crime, and you know, because they don't answer so much to anybody except through the projects. There may be increased crimes in the hosting communities. How is Dr. DIP handling such challenges?
Yes, the challenge of them, of the host and the refugees mixing, and and how they, and the relationship between them. With Dr. DIP, we're doing this through that approach, the development approach. As the minister was saying, once you put these services in place, once you put these services and where the host communities are the primary beneficiaries, they tend to become more willing to work with the refugees. They tend to request more services and more refugees. We've had he will tell you that there's some districts where that are requesting that refugees be brought into their district.
Which districts are those in particular?
Is it Chisoro district? Yes. Yes, there is some of these transition districts which are not hosting districts.
That with them coming, they'll have development,
yes,
socio-economic.
Because of Dr. DIP.
Yes.
Okay, all right.
So they're requesting for more refugees. They say, please bring some refugees here, like Zombo. You know, they're saying no. For us, we also a transitional district. Why can't we host refugees in Zombo? But generally, the refugees mostly stay in camps, in the settlement, not camps, in the settlements. In Uganda, we don't have camps, we have settlements, and where they have rights, rights to do what they want, to have land, rights to do any enterprise they want. They also have a right to leave. And if you travel to these districts, you will find towns where refugees have settled. If you go to Chaka or you go to Nachibale or wherever you go, you'll find these towns before you reach the settlements where there are a lot of refugees, and they live in harmony with the nationals. There's some areas, I think, on the border they share languages. In certain areas, like when they are transported in to Bidi Bidi in Yumbe, or when they're transported in to Chaka, so they may be different in their language. But we still, as a project, we are encouraging social cohesion. We are encouraging activities that bring about more, games. We have recreational centers that we are building in some of these refugee settlements. We are now targeting, at the beginning we targeted the host, but we got additional funding, the $150 million that the minister talked about, which was a grant, and that one we are focused more on the settlements themselves. And so we're doing recreational centers. We're encouraging this activities that bring them together with the host and the refugees. As far as psychosocial support, we are thinking about it. We have not gone that area yet, but it's happening just because of what we're doing. The relationships are getting better as a result.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, this brings into the hotspot government, and I'll have the minister here. as you said, Simon, that Dr. Deep is encouraging a lot, of growth, regional growth, district growth, or community growth for that matter. You have rightly stated that districts like Chisoro are requesting to have Dr. Deep, implemented within Chisoro simply because of the benefits. You're looking at health improvement, you're looking at livelihood, you've talked about the road infrastructure, you've also talked about the statistics, how much money is remunerated out of these products, benefiting the locals. Doesn't that put government on the hotspot? Meaning that in Chisoro, they feel like government is not doing the due diligence to be able to cater to the basic services that people of Chisoro and maybe other districts should be benefiting from. And so they would rather tap into resources, programs and projects like Dr. Deep to be able to extend those services to their people to be able to then, have a livelihood improvement and generally.
That was, the problem is Dr. Deep would be just additional to what government have been giving to the various districts under decentralization. Money is sent to the districts for health services, for education, infrastructure, roads, and things like that. And even there are those affirmative programs now developed by government, different programs for youth, women, and so on, yoga. Those are all money going to the district. And currently now we have come up with the Paris Development Model. The Paris Development Model is actually is similar or about the same like our livelihood project under Dr. Deep. So the districts where the refugees are, they will get resources like the parish will get 100 million from next financial year, 100 million shillings per parish for their SACCO, for development. Alongside with that, under Dr. Deep, the livelihood project in those districts, we also add money, add some resources there, which would make it perform slightly better than district without Dr. Deep. The reason why they are demanding this, now we also want Dr. Deep. They are seeing visible development like the schools when we expand, the health center when we expand. The government side, because the whole country is big and the resources are also limited, so the pace of such development, like sub-counties, every sub-county will have a health center 3 and a secondary school. Now, to put those there, many sub-counties don't have. Now, when we come with Dr. Deep and we put the health center 3 and the secondary school, and then the other districts see that happening, they also want it done for them. Because from the government side, the government may put on one secondary school in a district or 2 this year, the other one for next year. But for us, when we have a refugee, district covered where the refugees are, we may do in all the sub-county or they will have secondary school, health center, infrastructure improvement. So I think the reason why many districts are demanding that also refugees go there, they want to partake to the Dr. Deep services. Otherwise, when you are talking about violence, because as I mentioned at the beginning, that these refugees are coming from what I would call wild west, like in America when you call it, where there are no law. I mean, the gun is the law.
Yes.
If you are living in a country where the gun is the law, and you come here to a country where the law is the law, not the gun, and that's where now conflict starts. They start beating their wives, the law come in. Don't do that. They start raping a child or something, doing abduction like that, law comes in. And that's where the conflict. And another thing that may bring also a little bit of conflict is when the support from the UNHCR is now dropping down because of lack of resources, money. So they are forced into petty crimes of stealing and so on in the district. Those are the kind of violence that can come, and the host community can be also can respond negatively to it, and it can create some conflict. And those are the challenges we keep addressing.
Okay, all right. Also, speaking of security, now that what we do have, what's happening in DRC, you get to have refugees that are coming in, and we welcome very well. So they are participating in Dr. DRDIP alongside the hosting communities. However, how do you then arrest the challenge of those that disguise as refugees, but really maybe they're rebels escaping from the other side, or in one way or another, they're lawbreakers on the other side, and they're coming through disguising on the refugee card? How do you get to arrest that in terms of registration, in terms of tracking?
Yeah, well, we have an elaborate system, because those Ugandans who have gone out there as rebels, for example, and if they have got their national ID, we have their record. So when you come, we are registering you. You put your fingerprint, and if you are a Ugandan, your picture will come up straight away. This is Uganda who has run to Congo, and we work together with the security agencies to ensure that those whom we register as refugees are real refugees. Those who are not refugees are not registered with us. Maybe they are taken to us. We will ask some few questions, and maybe appropriately, if they are Ugandans, then they have to come back to the community. If they are not criminals, but if they are criminals, then they will be handled according to the law. So we've so far, I would like to thank really our security agencies. They've done a great job, particularly the external security organization, the internal security organization, and the CMI. These are people who really they're monitoring very well.
Okay, all right. Simon, of course, you talked about it being a 5-year program upon inception. However, those 5 years, I believe, have been interrupted by COVID-19, the pandemic that caused the world to pause for about 2 years. And so that was a setback. What are some of the challenges that you have faced in that setback?
Yes, yeah, COVID-19 was definitely a challenge. So there was delay in the implementation of the project because we could not travel, we could not monitor. We had to put on pause because people had to be on lockdown. So there was a big delay as a result. In the refugee camps, I know there were challenges of disease, of the threat of COVID. And reaching them was difficult because of the lockdowns, so, and reaching the community. So there was that scare. But
and how did you address that particular one in terms of health?
Of health, well, in the project we have a very strong safeguards component. Safeguards is very big as far as trying to prevent things like gender-based violence, violence against children, so, and also health risks. So we provide training. There's a lot of training on safeguards, on health, and how to go about it. There's a lot of training on sanitation and those sort of things. We provided a lot of masks during that time of COVID, sanitizer for in all our projects. Yeah, but training is the main way we did, and most of our beneficiaries will tell you that they now, if you say, like you were saying, who want to go back to their country, say we want certificates on the trainings, certificates on the training on health. Please give us a so we can get you back home.
All right, and what are some lessons that you highlight strongly have come out of the implementation and the progress of Dr. DRDIP? Okay,
yes. Dr. DRDIP has had a tremendous lot of lessons. I think it's a very well-designed project. It has a very specific beneficiaries targeting very good of the project places that we are going to implement is very well targeted. So we had a very good design, first of all, of the project that has helped the project be very successful. But one of the things that is often talked about is our community-driven development model, the community-driven model that ensures that the communities are in charge, the beneficiaries are in charge of their development. They own, so we make sure that they are part of the process in assessing their needs. We have a gap analysis at the beginning of the needs, where the pressures, where the gaps, where the unmet needs of the host communities and refugees, and then they participate in the implementation, in the bidding process. They evaluate the bidders, they award contracts, the beneficiaries themselves, the communities on the ground. Then they oversee the implementation of the contractors, what they're doing, And then they finish off with the commissioning and completion of the project.
Okay.
So yeah, so that from top to bottom, we make sure that everything that we do is driven towards our priorities and is owned by the communities.
Okay.
And
also, what's the incorporation of the intended beneficiaries into DRDIP?
What's the...
How do you get to incorporate the expected beneficiaries in the host communities into DRDIP?
We go through, there's a top-level targeting process. We say, okay, these are the districts that host refugees, the 15 districts that you talked about at the beginning. Kampala also hosts refugees, but but the refugees here are not as needy, they're not as marginalized as those ones in the other districts. And then we look at, okay, these are the areas where refugees, where the hosting communities are, and then we mobilize through community facilitators. I have to give a shout out to our community facilitators on the ground who do a lot of work. They mobilize the communities. They have meetings, village meetings, and then they target together with the community. They target the beneficiaries. They say, okay, who are going to be the beneficiaries here? They organize themselves. They rank themselves according to wealth, according to who's the most needy, and that's how we do it. Okay. So from there, they select the enterprises. They select what they need, and then they submit those proposals to us. As government or as DRDIP, and then we disperse funds when they're approved.
All right, and finally, to Minister Hilary Onek, we want to find out, I mean, it's not only in the 15 countries where you do have the issue of refugees influx. What about the rest of the country? And moving forward from your ministerial position, is there an end term or long-term goal on actually dealing with the refugee influx in Uganda? And how can a regular Ugandan participate in those particular solutions to enforce displacement?
I think we have currently we're operating under the current Refugee Act of 2006 and also its regulation of 2010. We are in the process of trying to revising the refugee policies, out of which we consider new developments that has occurred since the other act was enacted. So if there are other areas to be addressed in the new act, we are going to perhaps amend the act to address those challenges. That's what we are currently doing. Otherwise, the nature of refugees in Uganda today has been very protracted, which means that really it has been a very long-term problem, which over time we are beginning to live with it as a challenge. It's not really a big challenge, but our real challenge now is, as the number keeps growing, that one now it will be a problem to our resources and also in relations with the host communities. Those are the kind of situation that we may have to look into in the new revised policy to regulate the management and the nature of hosting refugees in Uganda. We shall have to do that.
Okay. All right.
Otherwise, in the overall, I may want to add that overall, the kind of refugees here in our hospitable nature as Ugandans has enabled us to be successful in managing these refugees. And secondly, whereas other countries are closing their doors, like Kenya now is closing its doors from refugees and is trying to expel those remaining away, and others are also hostile to any foreigners who come as refugees. It has put Uganda, our humane way of handling refugees has given a good recommendation globally. People think Uganda is the best country to live if you are refugees as of now. And even the current foreign policies of refugees globally in the UNHCR, they are borrowing a lot from our practices. They are borrowing a lot from Uganda's practices. About now going now to 3 years, we have adapted a program called Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework, which is basically based on Ugandan experience. By the UN, they have adapted that. And that framework helps us to debate the issues related to refugees periodically, get solutions to them, make recommendations, and see how it works. Okay. So I think it's a very healthy country that we have for those kind of programs.
All right, it's a healthy country that we have here in Uganda. Honorable Hilary Onek, thank you so much. And also Simon Chisaka, thank you so much for bringing us to light with Dr. Deep. And of course, as the project development objective is, and that is to improve access to basic social services, expand economic opportunities, and enhance environmental management, especially for the hosting communities as well as refugees. They have done their due diligence in terms of the socio-economic services, infrastructure, road infrastructure. We have talked about the environmental infrastructure, but also the minister did point out that they're most interested in the livelihood improvement of those in the host communities, something that has been pictured in their implementation strategies and structures that have been shared here today. So at the end of the day, we get to see that the development response to Displacement Impact Project has done its due diligence to the extent that other districts like Chisoro are wanting to be a part of this project. It only means one thing, that there are results and that there is a future of having harmony created between the nationals as well as the refugees. The minister has also committed that they are having long-term projects and conversations in regards to having these refugees resettled back into their original countries. And one of the avenues that they're using is through education. The other avenue that they are using, of course, is through life skills, giving them life skills that will give them hope so that when they go back to their home countries, they have somewhere to start from. Well, this is where we come to the end of the Dr. Deep Talk Show. Thank you so much for having joined us, and we trust that this discussion has enlightened you. Good day.